Hello, welcome to another Q&A live session with me, Rebecca. I'm joining you here today from Melbourne in Australia. I work for the OET education team, and my goal for the next 60 minutes is to answer as many preparation questions that I get from you as I can. So it's great to see that we've got over 200 candidates joining already, and we've already got some candidates who've submitted a question, so I'll start answering those in a couple of seconds. Just for those of you who've not been to one of these sessions before, the way that this works is very, very simple. You type your question into the comment box, whether you're joining us from Facebook or from YouTube. You can post a comment in either of those locations. They come through to me and I work my way through as many of them as I can. So feel free, if you have a question you'd like me to answer in the next hour, to put your question into the comment box. And I'm going to head over there now to look at the questions coming through already and start answering them. And that is all that we do for the next hour. So thank you to everybody who has been commenting already. I'm going to scroll back up to the top. And there was a question actually that came through on YouTube a little bit earlier today that I'll start off with answering. This question came through from Ibrahim, and the question was, in the listening subtest, does spelling mistakes, I presume, drop the score? And also in the writing subtest, if there are lots of grammar mistakes, will it affect the score for the criteria? So two questions here. The answer to the first question is that the assessors can be flexible with the spelling for your answers in listening part A. Obviously, we encourage you to be as accurate as you can with your spelling, but perhaps there's a word that you hear and you're not quite sure how to spell it, in which case try and spell it perhaps phonetically, the way that it sounds. And provided the assessor can understand what you have written, it is the correct answer, they will give you the mark even if it isn't spelt 100% correctly. And in terms of the writing subtest, grammar is definitely part of the assessment criteria. It comes under the language criterion, but the language criterion also covers things like spelling and punctuation. So it's only a small part of one of the criteria. And the way that the assessors look at your grammar is they look at the overall grammar within the letter and how much the grammar that you have used impacts the reader's ability to understand the information that you're communicating. If you're making some minor mistakes and just once or twice, but it's not really impacting the overall letter, then it's not going to have a significant impact on your language score. However, if the type of grammar mistake that you're making would force the reader to read the sentence again a couple of times to try and understand what it is you're communicating, then that could have a more significant impact on your score for language. Patricia has a question also about the writing test, this time about the word limits. So the question is, are we penalized if we write more than 200 words in the writing test? So as many of you know, the writing test for OET is to write a letter. Now there's 12 different professions taking OET, and all of them will write a letter for their writing test. But there are different types of letter and different types of scenario that the different professions write about. Having said that, the instructions for all the professions are the same. And at the end of the writing task, you will see a guided word limit of 180 to 200 words, which is there. And it's for the body of your letter, which is the paragraphs that you write. Things like the address or the ending of your letter aren't included in that body count, the word limit, 180 to 200 words. But it's there to help you sort of keep track of what you're going to be writing. These materials have been tested already before you see them on test day to make sure that a letter that is within that word limit and within the 40 minutes that you have to write your letter is a possibility. So it's not absolutely critical, Patricia, to answer your question. to be exactly within that 200 guided word limit. The assessors don't count your words, but what they are looking at is whether you've included and communicated all the information that the reader needs to be able to continue care for the patient as per the request that you're making. So if you've gone quite a lot over 200 words, but have included some irrelevant information the reader doesn't particularly need, it doesn't relate to the current situation, then that could have an impact on your score for conciseness and clarity, which is another of the criterion. But if it's just slightly over, but all of the information is particularly relevant, then it's not going to have any particular impact on your score. Sharon has a question also on the writing test and says, could you please clarify my doubt? Who can be called an adult in OET writing? Is it from 16 years and above or 18 years and above? So the advice that we provide candidates when they ask this question is if the patient is 17 years or older, then we recommend using or treating them as an adult patient. But if they're 16 years or younger, then to continue treating them as a child. So the difference to that in terms of your writing is if the patient is a child, so 16 years or younger, we don't recommend using a title, Mr., Miss, Mrs., etc. Just the patient's first name is sufficient when you're writing about a child patient. However, when the patient is considered an adult, so someone who is 17 years or older, then a title is appropriate. So Mr., Mrs., Ms., whatever is written in the case notes, their first name and their family name is more appropriate in that situation. Some really good questions coming through. So thank you for sharing those with me. This is a nice comment from Mike. I'm just going to put this up on the screen as well. So thank you for answering my questions every time you do Q&A, and I've passed my test, all Bs this March. Thank you so much, Michael. It's lovely to have that compliment, and I'm so happy to hear that you've achieved your goals. I'm sure it's a real encouragement to all of the candidates joining me today to know that dreams can come true, hard work pays off, and it's great to know that you're on your way to your new career in an English-speaking healthcare workplace. So well done to you. A question coming from Rahul, who says, can I use however as a connective? Absolutely. However is a fairly standard type of connective which is used to combine two pieces of information which have some contrast. So absolutely, that is a type of connector that is very appropriate for OET writing. A question this time about speaking from Aljon, who says, can you give a good summarization example for the speaking part? It's a little tricky for me to give a good example because I don't have a role play in my mind, but I can talk sort of more generally about summarizing. Summarizing can happen at various stages in the role play. I think a lot of candidates assume that the only place where you should be summarizing in a role play is at the end, so to sort of sum up what has been agreed. But to be honest, summarizing can happen at various stages during the role play. So one way that you can use a summary is perhaps towards the beginning of the role play, when you've asked the patient, perhaps the task is to find out from the patient more about their symptoms or more about what has happened recently. The patient is going to explain in their own words what's been going on, and then it would be appropriate to simply summarize what you have understood that they have just told you. So you could say something like, so just from what you have told me, my understanding is you've had these symptoms that have lasted for this amount of time. And that is a good example of summarizing. Now, of course, as I also said, you can summarize things that have been agreed. So, for example, if you were to discuss some lifestyle factors, some changes that you're recommending the patient makes. After you've discussed those changes with them and some agreements have been made, you could summarize. So again, you could say, just to summarize what we have agreed, you have said that you will try to eat more fruit and vegetable every day and only have maybe 1 or 2 alcoholic drinks per week. So those are a couple of different examples, Aljon. I hope those help with the question that you had. Anita has a question about writing the age of a patient. So, for example, and I think you're asking here on the RE, the reference line, do you include the patient's age as aged 65, or do you write it as 65 years? So before I answer that question, the recommendation is in the reference line, in the RE line, you include the patient's full name and their date of birth. So the date of birth is the preference to include there, because obviously in real life, if you were to send a letter to a healthcare professional, the date of birth is something that they can look up on their database, that they can look up on their computer system to find the patient. So it's seen as a much more accurate and useful piece of information than their age. However, if the date of birth isn't provided in the case notes for whatever reason, then you can certainly write the age in that same line, in the reference line, And Anita, either of those options, age 65 or 65 years, are both acceptable. Nisha has a more general question about preparation. So is it possible to clear OET in 60 days preparation? So this is a good question. It's one a lot of candidates will be thinking about, I'm sure. It depends from candidate to candidate, and there are a few things that it really does depend on. The first one I would say is, what is your current level of English? Most OET candidates are aiming for a B grade. That is the grade required by most regulators. It could be possible that you're able to achieve a slightly lower grade, for example, perhaps a C+ for one of the skills, but it does depend from regulator to regulator. But regardless of that, finding out what the regulator requires in terms of grades is important, and then finding out how close to that level your English already is. Now, if you've taken another kind of language test recently, you may already be able to tell how close am I to that score for OET purposes. Another way of checking this would be to take one of our sample tests from the website and check your answers against the answer key or from the sample answer provided for writing or for speaking. And once you understand how close your English is to the score that you require, that already starts to answer the question about whether 60 days would be enough for you to prepare for the test. Because if your English is quite close to that level already, then 60 days could definitely be something manageable. However, if there are quite a lot of gaps in your language knowledge, there are things that you're going to need to work on and improve, then you may end up needing more than 60 days. The second really important point to consider with how much preparation you're going to need is how much time can you spend in that 60 days preparing. I know most of you are working as well as trying to study for OET, and that can impact how much time you have available for your study. To prepare for a test like OET, which can be really quite life-changing in terms of the difference it can make for getting you a new career, emigrating to a new country, you do really need to try and put aside a good amount of time for your preparation. So if you're going to be able to spend 2 or 3 hours every day of those 60 days preparing, again, that could be sufficient to prepare in the time that you've got available. However, if you're only going to be able to spend maybe 1 day a week or a few hours on 2 or 3 days a week, that may not be possible for you to achieve your goal within those 60 days. Eileen has a nice question. This comes along the lines of, is there a dress code for the OET test? So Eileen, there isn't. I would recommend going along in something you feel very comfortable in. You're going to be sitting for a period of hours, so you do want to feel comfortable in what you're wearing. My other piece of advice would be to wear layers. So put on a layer that you can take off or put on depending on the temperature inside the test room, because obviously the test room will be set to a particular temperature, which may suit some candidates more than others. So if you've got an extra layer with you that you can either take off or put on to ensure your comfort with the temperature in the room, to me, that would be a very sensible idea. Shizada is asking a question very similar to the one that I answered at the start of the session. So that's a good place to remind you that this session is recorded and will be available for you to watch both on our Facebook and YouTube pages at the end of the hour once I've finished. I will just briefly cover this question again, but other questions, if I'm not answering your question, it could be that I feel I've already covered that topic. So it'll be good to go back and listen to the earlier part of the recording if you missed it. So in terms of spelling mistakes in listening part A, the assessors can be flexible about the accuracy of your spelling. Obviously, they need to be able to tell that the word that you've written down is the correct one. So you do need to try and spell as accurately as possible, and definitely phonetically, so the way the word sounds if you're not sure about the correct spelling. But then provided that it is the correct answer, that the assessors can work that out, they will give you the score for that answer, even if it isn't 100% correctly spelled. Alice has a question about breaks in between the tests. So on test day, the first test that you'll complete is listening, which is followed by reading and then by writing. So those three tests are done back to back. And the only type of break you get as such is the time it takes for the test day staff to collect in your papers and to deliver the next set of papers for the next part of the test. So those breaks don't allow you, I'm afraid, to get up and move around the room or to go to the toilet. You do need to stay sitting in your seat because of the security aspects of the test. You are checked into the test, you're checked into your seat. And so if there is any movement, those checks have to be done again, which can extend the length of the test in general. So there are breaks where you can sort of just relax a little bit, take a few deep breaths before the next part of the test while the papers are being collected and given out. But that's the only type of break that there is available. Kalpana says, can we write 2 suspected answers in reading part A? And if one of them is correct, would that be marked correctly? So Kalpana, that's an important question because it can have a real impact on your score for reading part A. It's really important that you only write down one answer for reading part A. So if, for example, when you are completing the test, you're not quite sure and you sort of write down 2 answers, before the test time finishes, you will need to go back and make a final decision about which one of those answers that you want to submit for assessment, because the assessors are unable to mark an answer where there are 2 answers given. They have to score you 0 for that question. So it's really important that you only end up with 1 question for the assessors to consider. Betsy is asking about infants and children. What salutation shall we give them? So again, similar to a question I was asked a little bit earlier, when the patient is 16 years or younger, then we don't recommend any kind of salutation for that patient. Instead, just using their first name is absolutely fine and is sufficient. So that would apply to babies and children as well. Abir is asking about some more pharmacy writing material. So this is a good moment to mention the preparation material that we do have available to you. So we've got lots of free preparation material available on our website, and the web address is scrolling along the bottom of your screen right now. On that page, you will find 3 sample tests for listening and reading, and 4 sample tests for all professions for writing and speaking, including some helpful videos to explain writing tests and speaking tests number 3 and number 4. So do make sure you've checked out the free preparation material available to you. Then if you would like to find some more practice material, please do visit the OET shop. For each profession, we have an official practice book, which includes a further 3 practice tests, 3 listening, reading, writing, and speaking papers included for each profession in that book. Beyond that, if you're looking for more practice material or more support in your preparation, then we really do recommend our preparation providers. On our website, we have a number of teachers and schools who are listed that have completed training with OET and have been endorsed by us for offering high quality preparation that will really make a difference to your chances of success with OET. And some of them offer pharmacy courses. The link that I'm going to post into the comment box will show you the professions that these providers specialize in. So if you're a pharmacist, for example, Abir, check out which of the preparation providers offer preparation courses for pharmacy, and then get in touch with them for more preparation help and support. So that I've just popped into the comment box, and that's available for all of you to check. All right, just scrolling back up now to find where I had got to. All right, here we go. All right, this question comes from Mustafa, who says, in some writing tasks, there is a question mark in the case notes. Does it mean that this info is not essential? It doesn't exactly mean that, Mustafa, no. A question mark used in the writing task is used as a symbol to mean potential, possible, suspected, tentative, a word like that. So it depends what comes after it. So, for example, if we had question mark pneumonia, it might mean that the diagnosis is possibly pneumonia, or pneumonia is suspected. So that is the meaning of a question mark when used as a symbol in the case notes. Question from SJ, who says, could you please tell us how to write medicine dosages and durations in the OET letter? Are there any common rules? So SJ, yes. There are some recommended ways to write a list of medication in your letter. And we have articles on all kinds of things that candidates have queries on in the OET blog. And I'm going to post a link to one of the articles that will help answer your question. But if you're not familiar with the OET blog, again, available from the OET website, do head over and have a look at our preparation site. After this session, you'll find a link to the OET blog. And if you type into the search box the aspect of grammar or testing that you're interested in, you're bound to find a useful article on it in our OET blog. So thanks for that question. Maruga is saying, is it mandatory to cover all the tasks on the speaking card? This is a really common question that candidates are a little bit worried about. Absolutely fine to ask this question. So for all professions, you will complete 2 role plays, with the interlocutor taking the role of the patient or family member of the patient. And on your role card, you have a number of tasks that are there to help you to continue speaking for the 5 minutes allowed for each role play. Now, as I've just mentioned, those tasks are specifically there to help you maintain the conversation. So to keep the conversation moving forward, to have some ideas of things to say in case you sort of forget or come up with some silence. You've got another thing on your role card to speak about, which will help you to keep the conversation moving forward. So they're there to help you to continue talking, but it isn't absolutely essential to complete all of the tasks within those 5 minutes. The key part of the OET speaking test is that it's a conversation. You're having a patient-professional conversation, and so it's most important how you communicate the information, how you give the patient or family member opportunity to speak and respond to them. So that's much more important than absolutely finishing all of the tasks on the role card. Aoife says, in the speaking cue card, if it's written that you've examined the patient and found certain findings, should we ask the patient, can I examine you? So this can certainly be something that happens in your role play. In the background information above your tasks, it may say, as Aoife has written, that you've examined the patient and found some particular results. So in that situation, you don't need to ask, can I examine you? Because as the card has said, you've actually already examined the patient. Instead, though, you could mention that you've just done this. So for example, you could say, thank you for letting me examine you. Is it okay if I tell you what I think is causing the problem? And then you go on into the tasks and explaining what it is that you have found. Mojde is saying, do you have any free classes for punctuations and commas? So Mojde, no classes as such. However, as I've just mentioned, the OET blog does have quite a lot of useful help articles covering punctuations, particularly covering commas, but all types of punctuation. So do make sure you visit the OET Prepare page, find the link there to the blog, and then you can certainly read the articles about punctuation. Additionally, the other link that I posted into the comment box is a link to the teachers who are recommended by OET to support you with your preparation. They would certainly be able to offer you support with punctuation in their teaching. Mahmood says, how can I prepare for speaking with friends on test day? Is it necessary to cover all the notes? So I've answered the second part of your question. The first part of your question is a really good point. How can you prepare with friends? Because this is going to be something really helpful in your preparation if you can find a friend or colleague or family member to practice speaking with you, because the more speaking practice that you do, obviously the more comfortable and confident that you'll feel about the format when it comes to test day. Now, as I mentioned, on the website, we have some free sample tests for your profession. We have 4 different role plays that you can make use of with friends. But even if you've used all of those, you can make up your own situations. As a healthcare professional, you've got lots of experience and lots of examples of real life conversations that you've had with patients or patients that you've treated. And so quite simply, you can say to a friend or colleague, okay, so you're my patient, you're this age, these are your symptoms, this is what's just happened. We're having a conversation and I want you to ask me questions about what are my treatment options, and I want you to be reluctant to make the changes that I recommend to your lifestyle. And that's all it really takes, just giving them a few details about what the patient's experience is, and then you can complete your role knowing what it is that you want to say. So certainly make use of your own experience, your own background to practice, but equally with the official sample tests, use those with friends. As much speaking as you can do is obviously, as I said, going to help with your confidence and comfort on test day. Achana is saying, can you please tell me some reading and listening tips? So one of the best tips that I have for candidates is the free on-demand masterclasses, which are available again from the prepare page of our website. We're always really quite surprised how many candidates haven't been aware of all the really great free material that we have on the OET website for candidates. And the masterclasses are a really good example of this. There's one masterclass for each part of the test. They're all around 20 minutes long, but they cover some really helpful tips on what's expected for each part of the test and what sort of skills do you need to work on and develop to do well in that part of the test. So I'd certainly recommend taking a look at those masterclasses if you haven't already. And then for extra tips, we have a number of live classes running every week, provided by some of those teachers that I've been mentioning that we recommend. We have teachers like Steve from OET Online, Scott from Swoosh English, Paul from TTM English. They are regular contributors to our OET page and give live sessions covering some of the tips and strategies that you can develop for all parts of the test, reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Vinny says, is it possible to use templates in letters such as pertaining to the above information on admission, etc.? So when candidates ask me about templates, what they're sort of meaning is it okay if I learn a number of phrases and then make use of them in my letter? Now, of course, learning some phrases is a very good strategy in preparing for a test. But where it can actually be a problem for candidates is when they just use or they use all of the templates that they've learned in the one letter, and they're not sort of demonstrating that they thought about what language is going to be most suitable for this particular situation. So, for example, to use the phrase on admission could be absolutely appropriate if that's part of this patient's case notes and scenario. Pertaining to the above information, I would say slightly more formal than is needed for an OET letter. Despite it being a formal piece of writing, there are still levels of formality within that, and I would say pertaining to is slightly too formal, perhaps given the above information or due to the above information. But that, again, as a phrase is only going to be appropriate some of the time. You're not going to expect to use learned phrases 100% of the time. And to be honest, the students that get the best scores in the writing test and the speaking test, for that matter, are the ones that are demonstrating to the assessors that they have the flexibility with English to write a letter that is personalized to this situation, and they're unlikely to be using many sort of template learned phrases like this because each situation requires slightly different language, and the same is true of the role plays as well. Bensi is saying, recently many candidates have got low grades even in the speaking test compared to previous. Could you please disclose the reason, or if there have been any changes in the assessment criteria? So Bensi, I haven't heard any of those sorts of statements coming from candidates. Obviously, each time we have a test, we have a significant number of candidates who do achieve the scores that they want. We had that comment earlier from Mike, who had got the 4B grades that he wanted in the March test. And there are certainly many others like him who achieve the scores that they want in each test that is taken. Of course, there will also be candidates who don't achieve the scores that they want. And that really feeds into that other question that I answered a little bit earlier about how much preparation time is needed. And some candidates will take the test before they're perhaps really ready for the test. They haven't really got the language level required to be successful. Or perhaps something will have happened on test day. They've got very nervous, they've forgotten to answer, or they've run out of time to answer some of the questions, and that will impact on their score. So to reassure you, there have been no changes to the assessment criteria. There aren't any quotas around how many candidates can be successful or not for each test. It's literally the test is assessed based on the performance of each candidate on test day. And as I said, a lot of candidates do get the scores that they want and move on to be successful. Jojo says, I am writing to inform, or I write to inform. So Jojo, the correct language there would be I am writing to inform, present continuous, because obviously at the moment of writing the letter, you are in the middle of it. It's in a continuous action. So I am writing to inform is the correct verb there. Alfie says, can you please explain the urgent assessment letter organization? So organization and layout is another of the assessment criteria. We've talked about a few of them tonight for the writing test. And organization and layout covers the way that you have structured the information of the letter on the page. The layout part of that criteria is thinking about, have you got the address and the date at the top and the greeting at the end? But the organization part of the criteria is covering whether you have organized the information, structured the letter in a way to be as clear as possible to the reader. And the way to think about this is to try and put yourself in the reader's shoes and think about, if I was the reader, what information would I want to know as a priority? Which of the information that I'm going to receive in this letter would I say is more important than other information? So to always try and structure the letter in order of importance to the reader is really a good approach to take. Now, when it comes to an emergency situation, as you can imagine, the reader is obviously most interested in what has just happened to mean that this is an emergency situation, because this is going to impact immediately any decisions or treatment that they make for this patient. So starting with what has just happened when the situation is emergency is more successful than providing all of the background history, making the reader wait until the end of the letter to find out what has just happened. Put yourself in the reader's shoes and put the important information at the top of the letter. Ahmed says, in the writing subtest, in case we didn't finish the task, for example, if we didn't finish with a polite closing, would that affect the marks? So Ahmed, that really follows on to the criteria I was just talking about, organization and layout. If you haven't included an ending to your letter, then that will impact the score that you receive for organization and layout. Because you haven't demonstrated the correct layout for a formal letter, which does include an ending. So my advice would be that when the test day staff tell you have 5 minutes remaining in the writing test, if you are a little bit tight for time, I would leave a few lines space from the paragraph that you're writing add the polite ending, the greeting and so forth, and then go back and try and finish as much of that paragraph as you can. But don't lose any unnecessary marks by running out of time to finish the letter in total. Nicole is saying, what is a resit? So a resit is the term we use to mean a candidate who is taking the test a second or third time, depending on how many times they've taken the test before. So candidates all sit the test for the first time, and if they haven't got the scores that they need from that test, then a resit is how we describe the next test that they take. EJ says, what are your recommendations to improve the writing skills to get an A or a B score? So my recommendation is really to understand what it is that the assessors are looking for. And on our website, we have very clear information and assessment descriptions about the writing, speaking, and so forth criteria. And I'm posting the link to the writing page of our website in the comments right now. So on that page, you can find the assessment criteria, and really understanding what it is that the assessors are looking for to be able to give you the high score will help you to then demonstrate it and evidence it in your letter. Alice says, what items are allowed in the exam room? Is a timer allowed in the exam room? So Alice, candidates are allowed to take with them their test day stationery. So these are the pens and pencils and a razor or pencil sharpener if you wish to use one of those. You can have those on your desk. You can also have a clear plastic bottle of water and your ID, but that's the only equipment that you can have with you in the test room. There will be a timer provided at the front of the test room. The test venue will provide a timer, but candidates cannot have a watch or any other timing device on them in the test. Asha says, in the writing introduction paragraph, what should we write first, whether the purpose or the diagnosis? There's no particular right answer there, Asha. Again, thinking about what information would be more important to the reader out of the purpose or the diagnosis may help answer that question, but it can depend from situation to situation. So as long as you have explained your reason for writing and provided a brief introduction to the patient, which may include their diagnosis, those are the criteria for a good introduction paragraph, but the order that you write about those pieces of information can change. Nyana says, in listening part C, is there a chance to get a disease condition? So Nyana, listening part C will always cover something that is of general interest to healthcare professionals. Now, it could be an interview of a healthcare professional talking about their work, an aspect of their research or such like. Or it could be a monologue, a presentation by a healthcare professional, again, talking about an aspect of their work or some research they have done. The topic could well be on some kind of research into a disease or condition. It's likely to be something that's, as I say, is of general interest to healthcare professionals, but I can't sort of give you much more specific information than that. Nithya says, in reading, the instructions say answer with a short phrase or word. So if I write a short phrase as an answer, where in your answer key it's only given a word, would it be considered correct or incorrect? So the aim of reading part A is that all of the answers are really quite short. So in many cases, the answers can be a single word, or it may be a short phrase, perhaps 2 or 3 words, but nothing longer than that is likely to be an answer for reading part A. So don't feel like you need to answer with a complete sentence or to provide more information than the answer that you have taken directly from one of the texts. In terms of the answer key, if you look at official sample tests available on our website, you'll notice that in the answer key for any given answer, there are maybe some words given in brackets. If the words are in brackets, then that means those words are not essential. But if a candidate has written them, the assessor just ignores them. They're not essential to the answer. Any words that are provided which are not in brackets have to be included for the answer to be considered correct. So do bear that in mind with the answers that you are writing. If you've provided more detail than is necessary for the answer, which perhaps means the answer changes from just having the single word written down, that could have an impact on your score. So it's best to simply write only the word or words that are necessary to answer the question. Oh, I've already answered that question. Question from Sony: how to write an introduction for an on behalf of letter. So Sony, this is not a type of writing task that OET uses for candidates. So if you head over to the writing page that I have linked to in the comment box, you'll be able to look at the different types of letter that candidates may be asked to write for the different OET professions. So do head over and have a look at that. Sonia is asking whether we can use the word therefore in letters. Absolutely. Therefore is a standard type of connector which is used in formal writing. So you can certainly use that when it's appropriate to the sentence. Desari says, in my speaking, interlocutor didn't respond and she was unable to express the question. So Desari, I obviously wasn't in your speaking test, so I can't comment exactly on your experience. Just to let you know that the interlocutors have a role card in the same way that you have a role card for the role play, but they don't have any kind of script. So they are thinking on their feet. They're thinking of things to say in response to what you ask them and what you say in a similar way that you are doing during your test. And it can mean, like in real life, they're not really sure how to respond or they don't have any questions to ask you. So it could well be that that patient was simply playing their role. The interlocutor was playing their role and there wasn't information for them to give you. However, having said that, we do encourage candidates, if they feel that their test day experience didn't match how they expected it to be, they didn't feel the test day staff or the interlocutors completed their role in the way that they were expecting, please do mention that to the test venue manager, who will be available for you on test day, and they can send through a report to OET if there were any problems. Also, you can submit information to OET if you believe that your test day didn't take place as you had expected. Suresh says, Ari, baby Monica Sharma with the date of birth and Ms. Ritika Sharma, mother. Can I include two patients' name like in the above example? So occasionally it may be that the writing task covers both a child and their parent, but your reason for writing to the reader will be because one of those, either the child or their parent, is going to be the reader's patient, and the other person is being mentioned, perhaps also needing some support, but isn't the main reason for writing. So in all types of OET writing, there will only be one patient, and it's the patient's name that should go in the reference line. If there's cause to mention the other person, in this case the mother, later in the letter, that's absolutely fine, but you don't need to include their name in the reference line. Min Sun says, how many questions are there for OET writing? So for each OET profession, there is a single task, which is to write a formal letter to another healthcare professional. Wafa says, it's a dream to open a center in Baghdad. So thank you for that feedback. We are planning to start opening some more new test venues once COVID restrictions are relaxing around the world. And we are looking to, again, make available computer-based testing in venues where we currently don't have paper-based options. And also OET at home will be back later this year for candidates who have no access to any kind of test venue. Sonia says, could you please explain how to write medication in letters using capitals or small letters? So Sonia, you also have a question about punctuation with dosages. I answered that question a little bit earlier, and as we're coming to the last 10 minutes of this session, I'll encourage you to listen to the earlier part of the session to hear that answer. But in terms of medication names, this depends on the type of medication that you are writing about. If it is a type of generic medication, so for example, aspirin would be an example of that. It's a generic medication, or paracetamol. Those are written with a small first letter, so small p, small a in those examples. If you're talking about the brand name of a medication, so for example, Panadol, which is a brand of paracetamol, if you're writing Panadol, then you would use capital P to show that it's a brand name. So that's the rule for medication names. And again, we do have an article on that in the OET blog. Small first letter for generic names and a capital first letter for brand names. Rosmin is also asking a question about connectors. Can we use the connectors moreover and hence? So some connectors are not particularly appropriate to formal letter writing, and I would suggest that moreover and hence are a couple of examples that would be more suitable to academic essay writing. Instead of moreover, we may use in addition, therefore would be a good alternative to hence. Asma says, during the role play, can we see the role play card? Absolutely. You get to keep the role card with you for the entire part of the test. So you have 3 minutes to prepare using the role play card. You can make notes on it if you wish to, and you keep the role play card for your 5 minutes of the role play time. Anu also is asking about connectors and says, can we use as a connector? Now, as isn't a particularly descriptive connector, and there can be much better alternatives to as that particularly we see candidates using or overusing in the introduction paragraph, when a much better connector could be used instead. So we would ask in any kind of sentence to think about, do I need a connector, and what's the most appropriate connector for this sentence to help you make that decision. Kofi says, during the listening test, are we allowed to answer while listening to the extracts? Absolutely, and in fact that is what is recommended, that you should write your answers as you are listening, because you do get a little bit of time at the end to check your answers, but only listening to the audios once. The best idea is to complete your answers while you are listening. Abdul Monem says, when I refer a patient to a GP and I have some suggestions regarding their medication, Can I say kefaklo may be a better option, which does not interact with? In general, yes, you can certainly write that if that's as per the writing task. In terms of the language of your sentence, I think a better word than which would be because. And you also need to write maybe in this sentence as 2 words. It's a 2-word verb in this case. We're getting lots of questions coming through now. I think candidates are seeing one question about connectors, and so we're getting a lot more questions. Rosmin is asking whether we can use besides in writing. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that there are some connectors that are more suitable to academic essay writing. There are also connectors which aren't particularly suitable to formal writing at all. They'd be more suitable for informal writing or when speaking. And besides is certainly one of those connectors which I would say isn't formal enough for OET writing. So it isn't a connector that we would recommend. Alice says, if I have a very talkative interlocutor, how can I stop them from talking without being rude or seemingly interrupting? So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the interlocutors don't have a script and they are taking the role as a patient. And so interacting with you in a way that would be typical to the patient. So in terms of them being talkative, it's good to allow them to express situations in their own words. And certainly at the start of the role play, it's good to just let them explain as much as they want to. If they continue providing very long answers or being very talkative, it's possible for you to interrupt them very gently. So to say, thank you for providing all of this information. I need to stop you there because I need to ask you some questions, but we can come back to those points that you were making a little bit later if you like. So absolutely, just do it politely and gently, and that's absolutely fine if needed, because they are talking a little bit more than is needed. John says, can we highlight or underline words in the reading paragraph for the reading test and case notes in the writing test? John, you can certainly underline words. You can also circle words. However, you're not allowed a highlighter pen in the test room. That's not one of the stationery items that candidates are allowed. So you cannot use a highlighter. But you can certainly use your pen or pencil to underline, circle, etc. All right, I just have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to answer one more question and then to tell you a little bit about next week's session. So let's have a quick look for a new kind of question. All right, this question comes through. I'm sorry, I don't read Arabic, so I'm not sure of your name. But which line do we start writing? The first line afterwards, or leave the very first line and start from another? So in your writing answer booklet, you have 2 pieces of paper, both with lines on them, and some blank paper, which is on the back. You can use for any planning or drafting that you want. But in terms of the lined paper, start from the very top line and continue down from there. That's absolutely fine. So sorry that I haven't managed to answer all of your questions. It's always the case, I'm afraid. These sessions are really popular and I really enjoy answering all of the questions that you have coming through. As I mentioned, do look out for other live sessions coming from our preparation providers. They come out 2 or 3 times a week via our Facebook page and are a really good place if you're looking for more tips and strategies and support to join them there. In terms of our next session, we've got something a little bit special coming up next week. We're going to deliver a session called OET Mythbusters, and I'm going to be joined by my colleague Alex for this session. So it's next Thursday, which is the 8th of April, and we've called it Fact versus Fiction, and we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of that as well. So it's going to be a little bit shorter than today's session, maybe around 40 minutes long. But during the session, Alex and I are going to have a conversation about some of the myths or half-truths that candidates have heard or misunderstood about OET. So we're going to cover off some of those things, perhaps about the way that OET is assessed, or the way that you can get a good score. So it's going to be an interesting session. I think definitely one to join us for. We'll be posting the event details for that very soon. But just as a little sneak preview of what you can expect, this is when the session will be taking place, the time available in your part of the world. So I do hope that you're going to be able to join us for that session next week. That's it from me for another time. So we've got this myth session next week, and then I will be back again the week after that with another Q&A live session. If you're preparing for the test, maybe I'll see you again in one of those sessions. Thank you so much for great questions tonight and for joining me. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.